What's going on, everybody? Today is not gonna be like any other video I made. It's not like a top 10 tier list or who do I think is gonna be champion by the end of 2024, or what are my predictions for UFC 295 or 299 or whatever. Today is gonna be a different video. Now I don't know what YouTuber already did this video, but shout out to them, because there's a UFC YouTuber who posted a video titled why the UFC doesn't have a definitive GOAT, and I'm gonna look it up on my phone while I kind of talk for a second. But when you think of UFC, you think of Jon Jones or Conor McGregor or Khabib Nurmagomedov or Demetrius Johnson or GSP. And today my video is going to be about, now before I finish that sentence, I don't want to get too distracted, but the video, I'm looking it up right now, the video I got this inspiration from is titled Why the UFC Doesn't Have a Definite GOAT, uploaded by Hopper Zero MMA, and I'll put the link to that video in the description down below. But basically the video for today is I will be going over a couple UFC fighters who are considered the GOATs and talk about why there's reasons for them not being the GOAT, and forgive me, paper in front of my computer, and why there's reasons for them being the GOAT. And we're just basically going to talk about, like, I don't mean to stumble on my words or say unprofessional, but basically what it comes down to, the gist of it, is we're going to talk about today why the UFC doesn't have a definitive GOAT. Starting with Jon Jones, who in my opinion is the GOAT of the UFC, but he's not the definitive GOAT. There's a difference between thinking someone's a UFC versus thinking someone is a definitive GOAT, because when you say someone's the definitive GOAT, that means everyone universally agrees that Jon Jones is the best UFC fighter of all time, without a doubt. But that's not the case, because, and I'm putting the list of reasons why. He has taken steroids, he has a hit and run, and has a criminal record, and he's popped a few drug tests. He's failed a few drug tests. He's hid from the drug testing companies, USADA, to hide. There's stories of him hiding under gyms because they came to test him for drugs, and he was hiding under the gym ring for like 10 hours straight, waiting for them to leave because he didn't want to get busted for drugs. When you think of someone as the best fighter of all time, it's not just about what they do in the ring, it's about what they do as a person as well. When you think of Georges St. Pierre, a very great fighter, but also very good outside the cage. He would donate to homeless people, he would help people at shelters, travel the world and say hi to fans. Things that make him a great person inside and out the ring. But when you think of Jon Jones, what he's done in the UFC, 11 title defenses, 16 title fights, the most in UFC history. But when you think of him as a person outside the cage, he's taken steroids, he has a criminal record, he has a hit and run on a pregnant lady. You think of these things and you think of him doing cocaine, you think of him partying every weekend, you think of him making excuses for losing fights, or before he would go out to fight, he would say, I'm going to party this weekend, so in case I do lose, I have an excuse in my back pocket. Just scumbag things he would do. And there's people out there who play the moral victory card by saying you have to morally be a good person to be considered the best of all time, which I disagree with. Even though Jon Jones is a scummy person, I truly believe he's the best of all time. Now, I can understand why people would think that you have to be a morally perfect or morally high person to be considered the GOAT, because when you think of the word champion, you think of the best. You can't call a criminal the best. He's a criminal. He has a hit and run on a pregnant lady. You can't call that the best. He's had DUIs, steroids, cocaine, PEDs. He's been popped, And the reason it's so hard to call him the definitive GOAT, or just anyone on this list, the definitive GOAT, is because there's asterisks in their career. Moving on to Anderson Silva, he's lost 11 times, and it's crazy how many losses. in those 11 losses, I think he won one of them. No, not those 11 losses. Towards the end of his career, he lost like 5 or 6 in a row, and then won a fight, and then lost like more. From the time that he lost the belt to the time that he retired, I think he was 1-10, or was it 1-12? Let me look this up real quick. Now, losing is a part of the sport, 100%. Losing is a part of the sport. But to be considered the best, and then you lose 11 times, not even just losing, but 11 times. And there was a time where Anderson Silva in his career was on a huge losing streak, and it was crazy. I mean, so, okay, I'm looking at his list right now, and from the time he lost to Chris Weidman back in 2013 up until the time he retired in the UFC in 2020. Okay, so I'm looking at his list. He lost to Chris Weidman, lost the rematch. That's 2 in a row. He popped for a failed drug test, which is why the Nick Diaz fight was turned into a no contest. Lost to Michael Bisping, lost to Daniel Cormier. He beat Derek Brunson, and then lost to Israel Adesanya, lost to Jared Cannonier, lost to Uriah Hall. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights. He went 1-7 and 1 in those 9 fights. If you take out the Nick Diaz loss, that's 1. No, if you take out the Nick Diaz no contest turn because of the PED failed drug testing, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fights that he lost, and then 1 that he won. He was 1-6 before leaving the UFC. In those other losses that equate to those 11 losses, he lost in 2000, he lost in 03, he lost in 04, in 06. But on the high tail end of his career, he retired with 11 losses, and he failed a drug test. And people seem to forget this. People say, oh, John Jones can't be the GOAT because he sucks, and he has a failed drug test, and he beat up some pregnant ladies. And then you ask those same fans, would you say Anderson Silva could be the GOAT? And they're like, possibly, yeah. But he has a failed drug test, and he lost 11 times. Now, people like to use the excuse it was the end of his career, the tail end of his career. It's unfair because he's washed, and he's like almost 75,000 years old, or however old he was when he was retiring. Now I'm exaggerating. But I don't think the context matters. I mean, context matters to a certain degree of level. But when you lose 3 in a row or 4 in a row, that's when you should start thinking about, maybe I should retire. He lost to Chris Weidman twice. You lose to Chris Weidman twice, okay, that's understandable. Maybe you just lost to someone who's better than you. You come back and have 2 to 3 more fights, or even 4, at the most 5, but you lose those 4 or 5 in a row, and you have to retire. And then he ends up it's like the Tony Ferguson. Anderson Silva was Tony Ferguson 0.5. I mean, the precursor to Tony Ferguson, right? 11 losses, failed drug test. It's hard to call Anderson Silva the GOAT for any reason, because not only the failed drug test, but he lost 11 times in his MMA career. He lost 8 times in the UFC. Lost 7 or 8 times. He went 1-6 and he lost 7 times, or 1-7. It's one of those two. But almost 7 losses in a row, and then a failed drug test. It's hard to call yourself the GOAT. Moving on to Khabib Nurmagomedov. In my opinion, this may sound controversial, but he is not even top 5 UFC fighters of all time. I've heard Muslim fans, and every time someone mentions Khabib being the best, they're either a Muslim fan, a Russian fan, a Khabib dick sucker with their pants hanging low to their shorts. They're sucking them off so hard, bending them over. Basically, anytime I hear someone say Khabib's the best, there's 2 options. They're a Russian Muslim fan of Khabib, they're a Khabib fan, or they're just a John Jones or a GSP hater. It's never any other option. They're either a hater of a fighter, so they put Khabib above him, or they're sucking off Khabib so much the cum's dripping down their balls, It's just what it fucking is, really. Now, people say Khabib Nurmagomedov is the best of all time, and I've heard a handful of UFC fans say that. Okay, yes, he retired 29-0. Okay, 29 fights in a row, and he never lost one. That's a good record. But for the beginning parts of his career, he fought bums and plumbers. He fought my uncle every other fight, is what it was. You know, he fought the dude down the road. The crackhead Tarek McKinney. You know, Khabib has such a lacking resume, and look at these reasons, right? He only has 3 title defenses. How are you going to call someone the GOAT when they've only defended their championship belt 3 times? He never went up in weight, and he has a lacking resume. A very lacking resume. I mean, look, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Al Iaquinta are his best wins. Maybe RDA, you could make a debate for that. But when you think of the greatest of all time, you think of the best. And to be the best, you gotta fight the best. And you have to beat the best. Khabib had 13 fights in the UFC. And out of those 13 fights, he has only 4 good, credible wins. And those 4 good, credible wins, in my opinion, are Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, Rafael dos Anjos, and maybe Al Iaquinta. I mean, look, let's look at his resume. Let's look at the people he's beat that you could say are decent names. You know, he beat RDA, Michael Johnson, Edson Barboza, Al Iaquinta, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje. People say, well, he has a stacked resume. Really? He beat Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson at that time was 1-2 in his last 3 fights. He fought guys that weren't necessarily considered the best. Edson Barboza. Now, the thing with Michael Johnson and Edson Barboza, and you know, there's Abel Trujillo and Diego Tavares. He fought guys who were like B-tier fighters. They were B-tier fighters. Yeah, Michael Johnson, Al Iaquinta, Edson Barboza, Daryl Horcher, Pat Healy, Abel Trujillo. These guys are not on the same level as Justin Gaethje or Conor McGregor or Dustin Poirier. None of those guys were double champions. You know, they didn't have a very stacked resume like Conor did, or like Justin Gaethje, or like Dustin Poirier. And I think his resume is lacking, and that's why I couldn't consider Khabib the GOAT, is his resume is lacking. And what do you mean lacking? People might say, well, are Michael Johnson, Edson Barboza, Al Iaquinta, and RDA not good wins? Okay, they're good wins, but when you compare Khabib's resume to like John Jones's resume, it's vastly different. You can't compare the two. A big reason I can never consider Khabib the greatest of all time, he had 3 title defenses, and that's really why. I don't care that he was dominant. I don't care for dominance. I care how you end the fight. You know, I don't think your performance really matters. Okay, it does to some degree, but when you think about, oh, Khabib the best because he was dominant. Khabib dominant. He wrestled, brother. Khabib wrestled, brother. All he do is lay on people and punch them. You know, when you're seen as boring and being dominant, okay, you won because you're dominant. It's more so about the fights you have and how many fights, how many title defenses, how do you end the fights. There's a lot of things and a lot of factors that go into it. The biggest reason, in my opinion, I can't call Khabib the definitive GOAT of the UFC, he has 3 title defenses. You know, I mean, that's really it. If he got like 4 or 5 more title defenses, you could make a good argument, right? Let's say he went up in weight, became a double champ. Let's say he had like 3 more title defenses, plus his resume from those 3 more title defenses would have been amazing resume. You know, there probably would have been Charles Oliveira on that resume, maybe Michael Chandler, you know, maybe a Justin Gaethje rematch. It's difficult to put Khabib as the best, and the reasons people call him the best is, number 1, he's undefeated. I don't care about undefeated. You could be 45-15 and have more title defenses than Khabib, but people would say you got 15 losses, so you can't be the best. And people put this undefeated thing and shove it down everyone's dick and throats because, oh, Khabib undefeated. Undefeated doesn't mean anything. I understand once you get past like 5 or 6 losses, people are like, oh, okay, are you really that good? It's like people put this high pedigree pedestal on being undefeated. I don't think undefeated matters as much. Now, you might call me crazy, but okay, it's nice that Khabib had 29 fights and he didn't lose a single one. He was 29-0. But that O doesn't mean jack shit if you have 3 title defenses, never win up in weight, and have 4 good names out of 29 opponents that you fought. Think of that. Khabib had 4 good names on his resume out of 29 MMA fights. 29 mixed martial art fights, and the only 4 good, credible names on his resume are Justin Gaethje, Rafael dos Anjos, Justin Poirier, and Conor McGregor, and maybe Al Quinta because that was for the vacant title. I mean, that's sorely lacking in the resume department. Moving on to Demetrius Johnson. There's a small percentage of people that I see on Twitter. They're like, Demetrius Johnson is the GOAT. And you can make a case for it. 11 title defenses, which is the most consecutively in UFC history. But the biggest reason is his competition wasn't as good as the other so-called GOATs, like, to the dismay of, like, John Jones. You look at John Jones and everyone who he beat. Rampage Jackson, Cyril Gane, Lyoto Machida, Shogun Rua, Vitor Belfort, Daniel Cormier. I mean, he beat good, amazing, great fighters. In the competition at flyweight from like 2010 to like 2000 and like, what year did I'm trying to remember what year did Demetrius Johnson get traded? From the time that he became champion to the time that he left the UFC, which was what, 2018, he got traded for Ben Askren. Of all people, Ben fucking Askren. What, 2018, 2019? The flyweight division between those time periods, you know, the way I can explain it is the day that Demetrius Johnson became champion versus the day that he left when he lost to Henry Cejudo. The flyweight division was the most weakest it's ever been. Now, if Demetrius Johnson became champion right now, today, and then had 11 consecutive title defenses in the flyweight division right now, today, you could say he's the GOAT, because the division now is much better than it once was 6 to 7 years ago. The competition was sorely lacking. It wasn't as good as now. Like, you compare Brandon Moreno, Davison Figueiredo, Kai Car-France, Muhammad Makayev, Amir Albazi, Henry Cejudo. Compare those fighters to like John Dodson, Tim Elliott, Ray Borg. Those guys are not on the level of the new fighters. If you put Brandon Moreno versus Tim Elliott, both in their prime, Brandon Moreno wins 9 times out of 10. Henry Cejudo would mop any flyweight, even Demetrius Johnson. It's a 50-50 flip coin right there. The division is much better. It is now versus it was back then. And maybe people might say, you know, Demetrius Johnson is the GOAT, when the only reason you say he's not the GOAT is because the competition is much better than it is now, and it was stiffer back then. You know, those stupid idiots on Twitter saying competition doesn't matter. Competition definitely does matter. When you get called the best because you fought the weakest, it's easy to get. There's a saying I have. It's easy to get 11 title defenses when you fought weak opponents versus 16 title defenses because you fought the best. There's a big difference. It's easier to be looked up upon as the best when you're fighting weaker guys versus the best when you fought the hardest guys. Like, when you compare the level of competition that Demetrius Johnson fought versus the level of competition that Daniel Cormier fought. Daniel Cormier fought excuse me. Daniel Cormier fought harder competition. Daniel Cormier have fought better competition. He fought better fighters, better overall fighters. And people say heavyweight's the weakest division. I disagree. I think 6 years ago, flyweight was the weakest. It's not as bad as it is now. Flyweight now is really good, but back then it was the weakest it has ever been. And at this point, I'm just ranting on. But it's so hard to call Demetrius Johnson the GOAT when he fought competition that wasn't as good as the competition in the UFC today. It's just a struggle to consider him the best when the competition was sorely lacking. He had like 2 or 3 rematches with the same people because he was lapping the division. The division was so lack full of competition. He had like 2 or 3 rematches with the same people. And that's how bad it was. Thank you for your time. I know it's been a long ass video, and at some points it just seemed like I'm rambling on, especially to this certain topic of conversation. It's hard for me to get my point across because there's a lot to say on it. But honestly, the UFC does not have a definitive GOAT, and it never will. It honestly will never have a definitive GOAT. I truly believe that. There's no reason that anyone will ever be a definitive GOAT. Sure, John Jones has the most title fights. He has 11 title defenses, but he is a criminal. You know, Habib has 3 title defenses. Demetrius Johnson, competition was not the best when he fought it at the time. Thank you all for your time, and enjoy your night.